I ended up enlisting in the United States Air Force in I think it was July of 1941 as a pilot, and I retired from the United States Air Force in January of 1967 as a lieutenant colonel. So I'll tell you something about the program I went through to get to that spot. I just finished high school. I was born in a little town in Oklahoma called Enid. Now let me tell you how Enid got its name. It's I don't know if this is true or not, but Enid was a pumping station for all the big old locomotives as they headed west to California, and they'd stop and load up with water, and there's nothing there but a water tower. And a small cafe was down at the bottom of it with a sign on it that said Dine, D-I-N-E. So one time, just before the train got there, a tornado came past and turned the sign around. Didn't do any damage, just turned the sign. You get a lot of tornadoes, you know. They turned the sign around, and instead of saying Dine, D-I-N-E, it said Enid, E-N-I-D. So the conductor leaned out the window and saw the sign Enid. Said, "Okay, folks, we're in Enid. You can get off and get back to eat." So I don't know if that's a true story how Enid's got its name, but it hasn't changed much. It's the same size now as it was 75 years ago, so it's on the beaten path. But all during high school, I wanted to fly an airplane. I didn't know how I could do this. I used to read books about them and go out to the airport and look at aircraft and try to figure out what to do. So when I graduated from high school, I went to the Navy recruiting station to see how do you get into naval aviation. And the only thing they told me was say, go get a college degree and come back and talk to us. Well, that was going to be another 4 years. I didn't know if I wanted to wait that long. So I went to the Army recruiting station and asked them what was the requirements to get into Army aviation. And it was a 2-year degree, but they said they did have a test that if you went and took the test, it was a difficult test to pass, but you could get in without that 2-year education. And he said he's going to be gone for a week or two, and when he came back, if I would come back and see him, he'd get all the information about taking the test. So I marked it on my calendar at home, and a couple of weeks later I went back and to see him, and when I walked in, he knew me. He remembered me being there, talking to him before. And in the meantime, he found out they passed a law by Congress. It was called Aviation Student Training. And they passed a law that if you had a high school degree with 2 years of math, and you had a B average, you were unmarried, you were between 18 and 22, and you would re-enlist for 6 years. Service in the Army was a 3-year tour, but to get this program, you had to enlist for 6 years. So when I found out all these things and that I was qualified, I joined the Army. And that was in August of 1941. I ended up at Chanute Field up in Illinois, going to mechanic school. In the meantime, gotten all of my paperwork together, got a letter from the school president talking about me, and I was qualified for that system of flying sergeants. They just passed the flying sergeant bill, and so I was willing to spend 6 years in the service if they were willing to teach me how to fly an airplane. So that was probably Thanksgiving of 41 when I got noticed that I'd passed all this stuff and was just waiting for orders. And of course, the next thing that happened, we ended up in a war in December. I was at Chanute Field going through mechanic school at that time. And about a month later, in January of 42, I got orders to report to Kelly Field to begin flight lessons. That was really great. We took the same course that the commission lieutenants, they were going to be commissioned, took 2. We just didn't have that college degree that they had. We went through the same school, and we all ended up, the ones that were aviation state students graduated as staff sergeants, and the ones that were commissioned graduated as second lieutenants. So during the time we were in school, it was about nearly a year to go through flight school. They changed all the rules and regulations. You just had to feel warm. If you felt warm, you were in. You didn't have to have any kind of an education. So we all tried to change over from aviation student to aviation cadet. And we graduated second lieutenants instead of staff sergeants. We had a young West Point captain that was in charge of the school we were going to, and he contacted Washington, and he came back and told us all that there's some other things in the mill. We don't know exactly what it is, but we know there is a problem. There's a problem with the staff sergeant pilot versus the second lieutenant problem, and we're going to try to correct it. Well, what they did is they came out with flight officer, and the Flight Officer Act was passed sometime about the summertime, I guess, of 1942. It didn't get down to our base where I was stationed until December of 42. So then there was about 50 staff sergeant pilots in Midland, Texas, flying student bombardiers around. We all got notified at one time that we had been promoted from staff sergeant to flight officer. We didn't know exactly what flight officer was, except we wore the officer's uniform, we ate in the officer's mess, we slept in the officer's BOQ, but it wasn't an officer, we were a warrant officer. It was like the old warrant officers they had years ago in the service. So after we were all promoted from staff sergeant to flight officer, we all had brand new uniforms, and at that point I volunteered for combat duty. I didn't know whether I was staying there and was flying the student bombardiers around in an AT-11, but I didn't want to do that, or I wanted to do something different. So I volunteered for combat duty, and I ended up down in Tampa, Florida, flying P-51s and P-40s. I went to P-51 and P-40s down in Tampa, Florida, and the group of us, it was about 50 or 60 from Class 43A. I had graduated in Class 42I. And so I had a few more hours and more experience than the other people that I went to fighter training with. We all finished up together, and we all bundled up, and we flew across the South Atlantic to Africa. Landed in Dakar, Africa, and I think I landed in Dakar the first day of September 1943. Yeah, 1943 I ended up in Dakar as a P-51 replacement pilot. Well, there were no P-51s in Africa. They didn't even know what it looked like. And they didn't know what to do with these 60 guys. They grabbed me right off the back because I had twin engine time and stuck me in P-38s. Well, that's kind of what I wanted to fly anyhow, and I was happy. All the others, because they didn't have P-40s over there, they put them in P-40s. They were only there a week or two, and they all came back to where I was. And the P-40s didn't want it. The P-39s were being slaughtered by the German fighters. Also, the P-40s were just about as bad. The only aircraft holding its own over in Africa was the P-38. It was losing aircraft too, but at least it was fighting the ME-109 on even terms, more or less. So we all ended up, all 60 of us went through upgrading to P-38s there in North Africa, and at the end of that time, the only thing we learned how to do was just about take it off and land it. We didn't have any gunnery equipment over there, no targets, so we couldn't shoot gunnery at anybody, and we just learned how to. We got about 25 hours apiece in the P-38, and then they divided us up and put us out. There was 3 P-38 groups in Africa at that time, and I ended up in the 14th Fighter Group, 49th Fighter Squadron, about Thanksgiving of 40, must have been 43. Trying to think about
What model of the P-38 was you flying at that time?
We had, it seemed like it was either E's or D's.
An early one then.
It was an early, it was just some old war early P-38s that they had. But, you know, one thing I didn't think about telling you when I was talking about staff sergeant pilots, you know who was a staff sergeant? They did pretty good. The staff sergeant pilots did pretty good. 8 of them became generals. Now, that's not bad for 8 of them to be generals. And 17 of them became fighter aces, flying. And the top ace in Africa was in the one of the P-38 groups. I can't remember his name, but he was a flying sergeant to begin. I think he had 12 victories down in Africa, and so. Then we were in Africa for Thanksgiving. I remember being in the squadron at that time, and shortly after that, we started to make room to move to Italy. The ground forces in Italy, they had already invaded Italy, and they were moving up the peninsula. And when they passed, we were stationed there. We started, and we all moved to Italy. We moved up to Italy in December of 43. Yeah, it's hard to keep up with all that stuff. My first occasion to get involved with an ME-109 was in December of 43 over Athens, Greece. We were escorting we had 3 P-38 groups and 2 or 3 B-17 groups, and that's about all that. We became 15th Airforce too when we moved to up to Italy, and it wasn't a very big force, but we were making our known fact that we were there, and we were increasing all along. But my first time that I got involved with I was flying as the colonel, and he flew, the group commander flew with the 49th all the time, and I was flying as his wingman. We were at about 25,000 feet over Athens, and here came moving in about 20 109s. They were down below us, a couple thousand feet. They were down to attack the bombers. So the group commander, he had forward his 38th and went after down in a dive, and I followed him down in a dive. And when my airspeed passed, I think it was 550, if I remember correctly, was the red line on the P-38, and you weren't supposed to go past that, and I was going past that, and I said, well, what am I supposed to do? So I poured the power off of both engines and rolled my aircraft back to, I think I rolled it back to the right, and ended up right behind 4 ME-109s. I ended up lining one of them up. I had a good sense, and I shot him, and he started smoke come back from both sides of his engine, and both flowing back along the fuselage, and he took off someplace. And about that time, I kept saying, I'm going to pass these other 3. I'm going faster than they are. So I poured the 38 up into, we were tights on them, and blacked myself out. You know, here I am. I poured so many G's on myself, and my airplane just about stalled out at the top of my Sandel. I was back to normal, and I boarded, and then I was all by myself. I thought, well, this isn't what you're supposed to do. You don't want to ever be by yourself. So I started looking around for another P-38 to fly on red, and up above me and off to my right was another P-38. So I kind of scooted up there and got in beside him, and lo and behold, it was a group commander. And that's where I was supposed to be all the time. I don't know how that worked out, but it was okay. And we all formed back together, and we turned around and we finished the raid on Athens and started back home to Italy. And on our way back home, I thought, oh my God, that group commander is going to be on my fanny, because I lost him someplace. And but he didn't know I was gone. So everything was okay. When we got back home and we had a DP feed, I was credited with one ME-109 destroyed, and he was credited with one, I think, and the fellow behind me, Bob Seidman, was credited with 3 109s. He had a good day that day.
Wow.
And so when we had that meeting after we all post-mission briefing, I thought, I'm sitting there just waiting for the colonel to really give me the hell, He never said a thing. He went on, and then he came and said, and all the time Jack was right with me. I didn't know where I was. But that was my 3rd or 4th mission, and my first encounter with the ME-109.
How many hours would you have accumulated by that time in that plane?
In the P-38?
Yeah.
Probably about 35 or 40 hours, something like that. Yeah, we didn't have a whole lot of time, and we just did the best. We started getting new aircraft. By this time, it seemed like we were starting to get J's, and J's had a new wing flap on it. You could put that thing in the bank and pull it and lower your flaps. It really slowed you down. You didn't want to lose that much speed. But you could turn inside the 109 with those flaps down, and that's what you wanted to do, is turn inside of them.
Otherwise, he could turn inside you, right?
Just about, yeah. He could out-turn you.
Yeah.
So.
Jack, hold the microphone closer to your mouth.
Oh, okay. I'm waving around, so that's what I do.
If you rest it on your chin, then you can talk across the top of it, and then you won't have the chance of moving it around.
Okay, good. So I spent a year in Italy, not quite a year, about 10 months, finished my tour of duty, which was a 50 mission. The fighters had to fly 50 missions, and the bombers flew 25. And the poor bombers, they got beat up really bad. Because, they had to fly straight and level and to drop the ammunition, and they would just set it, and the Germans were just sitting down below them, just shooting straight up, but you couldn't only miss them, So it was the bombers had, particularly in England, the bombing force in England, they got slaughtered sometime, and it was I flew altogether 51 missions. We had to fly 50 missions to finish our tour of duty and get a chance to go back home. I flew 51 missions just so I could say I did a little bit more than I had to. And I lost a lot of good friends over there. This one story that's in this magazine that I left, it tells about we lost 5 aircraft that day, and it tells, it doesn't go into any detail, but all 5 of those guys, and this is amazing, were able to bail out of their aircraft, and they became prisoners of war, and they all got home.
Oh, right.
Yeah. After the end of the war, I kind of kept track of all of them, and they all made it home, so that was good to know.
Yeah.
And
was that the Ploesti raid by chance?
I was over Ploesti 2 or 3 times. No, that wasn't the Ploesti road. The one I was talking about is the one that's in that book. It's that story about, I believe it was Budapest. I believe it was over Budapest.
Okay.
So I finished up my tour of duty in July or August of 44, and went back to the States. Before I went back to the States, I was just sitting there in the squadron, and a new month ago or over, and I needed to get 4 hours flying time to get paid flying time, and I had already finished my mission. And the squadron commander said that he kind of enjoyed having a drink now and then, and we didn't have a whole lot of stuff in the club. We just scrambled for whatever we could get. I might tell you that I can throw this in at this time. When we would finish a mission, the doctors in the squadron, his main job was to give each of us 1 ounce of whiskey. And we had to sign house stood, when we got, we'd sign our name and he'd give us an ounce of whiskey and we'd either drink it or decide to save it and use it again. And any of the guys would look around and see who was missing, we'd sign their name and give them a little But don't tell anyone I told you about that. We did. We were all a bunch of kids, 20, 21 years old. And they're lifelong friends, really. You've known these people, your whole life. And when I went back to the States, I was just sitting there waiting to... They were getting ready to invade southern France when I went back to the States. And that was they were making preparations to move over to Corsica or someplace pretty closer to southern France. And the squadron commander said, Jack, you don't have anything, you're not doing anything, and you probably ought to get 4 hours flying time before you go back, because I said, you're going to go through a rest camp and all that, and you may not fly for a month or two. He said, why don't you fly down to Tunis and see if you can't pick some booze up for our club? And they...
That was a secret mission.
So anyhow, the engineering officer had taken 2 old belly tanks that we couldn't use and that were not flyable, that we could fly it on a mission. And they put them on my airplane, they cut the doors in them, put a bunch of straw inside of that, and I was supposed to put all the booze down in the belly tanks. And I took off for Tunis. Flew down to Tunis and landed, and I told the operations officer at the field there what I was trying to do. That's I'm going to answer it.
Sure.
Can you call me back later? I'm making a speech or something. I don't know who that is, probably my daughter. But anyhow, I flew down to Tunis and they gave me a truck and a driver and we drove around town and I didn't know what to buy or what not to buy. But it looked okay to borrow something, I'd buy it, I can't remember where I got the money, but they all gave me some, I guess that was paper money, probably, if you didn't have any dollar money, green money. But I picked up what I could and loaded them on board the aircraft in the belly tanks and started back to Italy. And I was just flying along around 10,000 feet, kind of bored, just sitting there and not anything to do. And as I was making landfall at Naples, I was flying directly over the Isle of Capri. But the Isle of Capri was a rest camp for 15th Air Force. I'd been there a couple months ahead of time, and it was for when you were getting close to, after you finished your tour of duty, you just went there for a few days off. And so I thought, well, I got some friends now and then. I think I'll just make a practice dive bombing run at the Isle of Capri. So I rode this 38 over, completely forgetting I had these 2 belly tanks. When I passed through, I think about 300 miles out of the roof. I looked up over the leading edge, gone. Both belly tanks are gone. They dropped both belly tanks. Someplace around the Isle of Capri. And everyone was waiting for me. They
noticed you didn't have the tanks.
Yeah, they said, oh, here comes Jack. No, that can't be Jack. He doesn't have any tanks. I had a hell of it. I've never explained to the old members of that squadron, if I ever get back to another reunion, and I hope I can, I think I'm going to tell them how I dropped the tank. I just said, I don't know what happened. And all of a sudden, and they went because I exceeded the speed limit. I never told anyone that. And there's only, out of this magazine article, there's 15 of us that were over Budapest that day. I'm the only one left. I think I'm the only one. There may be one other. There might be a fella up in Dallas that is still alive. But at the most, there's 2 of us still alive. So I'm 91, and I'm one of the younger ones. So most people are getting older. But I spent a year in Italy. I ended up with 5 enemy aircraft destroyed and 1 Fabre destroyed. The one probably destroyed, I changed to a probable. I was credited with it. But I never did know exactly. It was that first aircraft I saw over Greece that day, and I never knew for sure whether I destroyed it or not. And so I changed it to a probable. But the old group commander, just before he died, he just said, "I know Jack shot that plane down." So I don't know, but I did. I enjoyed my year that I spent with him, and I keep in touch with him all the time. And I came back to the States and ended up flying P-38s as an instructor. And then I ended up picking up P-38s over at the factory out in California and delivering them to an East Coast place where they were then shipped overseas. The P-38 did a good job down in Africa, and it did a good job down in over in Japan. In England, it didn't have such a good, I don't know, maybe it'd been the cold weather. But as soon as they could get 51s, they replaced all the 38s in England with 51s.
Did you guys ever tangle with the 190s?
Yeah, quite a bit. We saw more 109s, but we also tangled them, and we got in fights with the ME-210.
Really?
Yeah, and the 210 was a twin engine. It had a 2 or 3 man crew. It had a tail gun. I can't remember what it had. And so at the end of the war, I left the service, but I stayed in the reserves. And the next thing that happened, Korea came along, and I was called back. And the outfit I had been practicing with in the reserves was a B-29 outfit. I ended up flying B-29s for 5 or 6 years. I tried to get back into F-86s because they were looking for F-86 pilots, but they wouldn't take me because I had been checked out and was an aircraft commander on a combat-ready crew flying the B-29.
What rank were you then?
I was a captain. I might have been, captain, major, no, just a captain. So then, as a captain, I went up to SAC headquarters as an instructor pilot. We had 2 B-29s up there. And every time, and there was 13 generals. And every time one of the generals wanted, and they all wanted to fly the B-29. Because it was the only aircraft that had full combat for them. So every time they wanted to go someplace, I had to go with them. My wife, she didn't like that job too much because I was gone quite a bit of the time. One of the fellows I flew with up there, it was really amazing. He was a West Point football player back when they had that Mr. Inside and Mr. Outside, the two. He was the inside. I'm trying to think of his name. I used to fly around with him quite a bit.
Blanchard, Doc Blanchard.
Blanchard.
Davis was the outside, he was inside. Glenn Davis was the outside.
Blanchard.
And Blanchard
was the one. He was enormous. And when we go someplace and he was on board and people would come out to meet him, when he'd get out of the aircraft, I'd have to taxi it off and park it some other place. And every time I had to do that, I had to change the seats because I couldn't even reach the controls because he was so big, And Doc Blanchard, that was his name. And he'd come back and he'd ready to leave. He'd look over at me, he'd get in the seat. He couldn't hardly get in the seat. He said, "Jack, you've been in my seat again, haven't you?"
But did they want the left seat?
Yeah, they would. I had to fly through from the right seat. They'd take the left seat.
Your airplane, though.
Yeah, so from that job, we got rid of the 2 B-29s finally. They weren't a very good passenger airplane, but the old generals liked to fly them. So then I went back over to Africa again. I was in Africa as the commanding general staff pilot flying the C-54. And so I flew him all over Africa and Europe for 2 or 3 years. And I kind of enjoyed that type of a job. And the State Department, when I want to tell this story? Yeah, the State Department was paying my bill. I wasn't spending my own money when I would have to go to Paris They put me up in the best hotels, but I wasn't paying for it, you know. And I didn't know how expensive it was, so my wife and I decided we'd go up to Paris and London on a vacation. And I asked them to make me reservation in Georges Cinq in Paris, and they said, Jack, now the State Department, you're not on official business, they're not going to pay for this. I said, oh, I know that, I'll pay for it. I probably shouldn't have said that either. It was kind of expensive. So anyhow, we did. We went to Paris and we enjoyed the trip, and it was more expensive than I thought it would have been. But when I came back to the States after that trip, I ended up as director of safety of a bombing out in New Mexico, and I was there for 8 years. And when I got the job as director of safety, the colonel said, I don't know, Jack, whether I want you or not. I said, you don't have it. He said, you got a lot of flying hours, you got a lot of flying time, but you don't have any safety experience. No, I don't have any safety experience. So he started sending me to school. And that turned out really a bargain for me. I went to NYU, to ground safety school at NYU up in New York. I went to traffic safety school at Northwestern University in Chicago. And I went to flying and missile safety school, both out at the University of Southern California. So by the time I was ready to leave the military, I had a pretty good record in safety.
And you had your 2 years of college too.
Yeah, and I did. I finished my 2 years of college. I never went 4, but I did go 2. So when I left the military, I had a job waiting for me at Kennedy Space Center. I didn't know Joanne. She was in the Space Center business, but I didn't know her at that time. And so I went to work for 2 different contractors at Kennedy Space Center. I was there I was part of the launch team for all the launches to the moon and back. And it was kind of an interesting job, you know. And I had that job, I got the job because of all the training I got in the Airforce. So I really look back and I enjoyed all the time I spent in the Airforce. I really did. It was an enjoyable thing, and I enjoyed the time I spent at Kennedy Space Center. We had some problems there. We had, about the time when I got there, they burned 3 astronauts up in a capsule that I couldn't believe it. They locked the astronauts from the outside into the capsule. It was on the ground. They were practicing it. And they couldn't get it. They couldn't get it open from the inside. I can't believe they built something that you couldn't get out of. That the guy flying the thing couldn't get out of, you know. But they did.
What kind of gas was it they had in that thing that was so explosive?
It was helium, and it was only 20% helium and 80% hydrogen. Yeah. So it really burned, you know, pretty badly. Then they changed it to where it was nitrogen, mostly 80 or 90% nitrogen, which was okay.
That Grissom that got killed in that Grissom?
Yeah.
He was one. There was 3, weren't there?
There was 3 of them that burned up
Grissom was
after, and I can't.
I don't know who the other 2
Chafee was one, wasn't it? White.
Grissom, White, and Chafee.
I can't remember the names. I've been doing all the talking, and I've jumped around a lot because it's easier to do that than try to explain anything longer. But if there's anything else I can tell you all about, or anything,
yes. How was the range of the P-38 compared to a P-51?
About the same. The 51s had long range, and so did the 38, but they both carried drop tanks. And now we never went to Berlin. Berlin was outside of our range, but they could go to Berlin in 51s out of England, but we couldn't go that far. So the 51, I don't know how much it carried, but basically the 2 aircraft that could go all the way with the bombers was the P-51 and the P-38.
The 38 was burning gas and 2 engine.
Yeah, but there's some really great things about it. It had counter-rotating pops, so you didn't have any torque on takeoff or diving in after another aircraft or something. You didn't have a problem with torque on the P-38. You had turbo superchargers airplanes, and that allowed you to go. I've been up to 35,000 feet in a P-38. It was kind of sluggish at 35,000 feet, but you could fly it that high, and they could go. And the P-51 could go that high because of that Rolls-Royce engine. That's what made the P-51 such a great.
I heard that the P-38 had a bad heating system. That's why they didn't want to fly too far to Germany and Europe, because it was too cold for the pilot.
Well, it was cold. My airplane was cold, and I complained about it to my crew chief. And what he did is he took some sort of a duct system and put it off on my turbo, for the hot air was coming off the turbo tube, and ducted into the cockpit, so I was nice and warm. But I don't know exactly what he did, but somehow he ducted some heat into it. Was a cold airplane. Yeah, it was cold.
I read someplace that Charles Lindbergh did a lot of experimentation on the P-38. Did you ever hear anything about that? Did he ever help you out, or things he discovered on the P-38?
No, I don't know.
That was Pacific, yeah. He was
He was in the Pacific. They did that in the Pacific.
Yeah.
I often wonder what he did.
But you know, Lindbergh.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was. I forgot. I did remember
Charles
that.
Lindbergh.
He was sent over to, and you know what? They say there's no record of it. They say he shot down two Japanese planes when he was over there.
No doubt.
Yeah, he was teaching the people that were flying the P-38 how to manage a fuel system for long range, saving gas. I don't know what they called it, but yeah, he was there. I'd forgotten about that.
They say that he was credited with giving those P-38s enough range to shoot down at Yamamoto in that bomber.
Yeah.
With his.
Yeah, that and they used the 30.
They were able to get that range.
I knew one of those pilots who was flying those four. He lives in Orlando, in fact. Can't think of his name now. He was one of those four that, and the fellow that claimed that he shot him down, I don't think it was his one. I think it was really one of the others. But he came back home and he said, no one's supposed to have known about this mission or anything about it. But as soon as they landed, this one guy, and I can't remember his name, said, "Hey, I shot down Yamamoto." But I think it was one in the flight, but I don't think he was the one.
Yeah.
But he got credit for it, so I guess it didn't make any difference.
After your first shooting down the Messerschmitt, did you get to see the gun camera film afterwards to have a look at it to see what gun it was?
I'm sorry.
Did you get to see your gun camera footage?
Yes, I did. Yeah. In fact, I had some of them. That's been so many years ago. I don't know what happened, but I did have one time the armament officer cut out a part of one of it. It was a good film. Had the correct lead on this German aircraft, and it showed my bullets hitting him, and then he exploded. Yeah, I did have one film. That's the only one I remember seeing.
What aircraft was that? Was that a 109?
109, yeah. Yeah, I had credit for 4 109s and 1 210. And then the one that I turned back was also another 109 that the colonel said, "Are you sure I'd shot down?"
We'll give you credit for it.
Yeah.
Jack, can you tell about the other ones you shot down? After the first one you shot down, what was the sequence of shooting down the next 2 or 3?
Yeah, okay. The next one I shot down was in May. That one I shot down was in December. The next one is in May. I shot down 2 aircraft in May. What had happened to me, and I don't know how I got picked for this stuff, in the last part of April, and about half of May, I was sent down to Egypt to go through an RAF gunnery school. I flew gunnery practice with the RAF for a month down in Egypt, and you know what I was flying? I was flying the Spitfire and the Hurricane. And the Spitfire was really a great little airplane to fly. You could lower that thing over on its back at 1,000 feet, pull your control column just back into your stomach, and you'd come out of your dive before you hit the ground. You can't. But that Spitfire, it just didn't have any gas. The Spit only had a very small amount of gas, but for the defense of Britain, it was a great airplane, and I enjoyed flying it down and why they sent me down there, I don't know. But after I came back, I think in just 2 or 3 days after that, I was flying across a German airfield up around Rome. And the first thing I know, here was 109 coming straight at me. I don't know where it came from, but what happened? I just pointed. I was a little bit above him, and he was firing at me. I could see all of his guns blinking at me, and I just pressed my trigger, and he went straight into a climb with his. And I never saw him again. I went underneath him, and the fellow leading the squadron that day gave me credit for a victory, because I never saw the aircraft, but he said when the German aircraft stalled out, when he made that real steep climb right in front of me, he bailed out of the airplane. He said he watched him bail out. So that was one in May, and another one in May was a 210. We were attacking it was a heavily defended place in Germany. I can't remember the name of it, but he was always getting in a fight up there, and we went into a big group of 210s. A German 210 was a twin-engine airplane and it was classified as a fighter. I think it had more than one man on board. I think it had a gunner in the back, or maybe the real firing guns that the pilot did. I don't know, but I ran across one of those. I just moved right in behind him and started shooting at him. And the first thing that happened is his right engine burst into flame, and he started going off to the right. He crossing right in front of me. I was still shooting at him. So that was another one that I shot down. And then in June, and it's in this story here, over Budapest, I shot down 3 enemy aircraft. I only claimed 2, but my wingman claimed the third one that I didn't see. He said that, so I was credited to 3. What happened on that mission, that was probably the biggest fight we ever had. There's 15 of us, and there was about 50 German planes, and they were getting the best of us, really. No, not well, I don't want to say that. That's not good. But we did keep them from getting to the bombers. They never got to the bombers. We were the only ones left over the target when they finally got in touch with us. We'd gone across the target with the bombers, and Lou Benny, an old good friend, was leading the squadron that day. We made a big 360 around the town and looking. We were all looking down, watching what they were bombing, and they were heading to the oil refinery. It was burning away, and that's what we were looking at. And all of a sudden, someone said, "Hey, it looks like there's about 50 P-51s up above us coming this way." And about the time he just said that, and someone else said, I don't know if I ought to, "Oh shit." He said, those aren't 51s, those are 109s, and it was. But there was about 50 109s, and the only one left over the target was the 15 of us. And they shot down 5 of us that day. But like I say, all 5 of the people were able to bail out of their aircraft, and they lived through it, and they got back home at the end of the war. And I was credited. I only claimed 2 that day, but my wingman claims the last one that I was shooting at exploded, and that I would get. What had happened, on that mission, I ran out of ammunition. I used up all my ammunition. And the last time I was shooting at anyone, I saw I had 4 50s and 120 millimeter. And I could see my 50s hitting the engine nacelle up ahead on this 109. And then all of a sudden, my gun stopped. They just quit. And I'm sitting there looking at when they quit, I looked down and what could it be? I didn't know. And when I looked up, the airplane was gone. I didn't know where he went to. But he was gone, so I never claimed him. But that's when they give me a third credit for. And the other, something else about that. Yeah, I didn't know whether my guns had jammed or out of ammunition, but it turned out I was out of ammunition. I'd used up all of my ammunition that day. And all of us, 10 of us got home that day. And
how do you shake 50 enemy like that when there's just a few of you guys, I would think they would still be mad at you,
Well, what they did, we ended up in a big Luftberry. What the Luftberry going around. We didn't know, and we couldn't get out of it.
Yeah.
And the Germans were diving into our circle, and we just kept, it was all of us. And the fellow just ahead of me, Moose Musgrove, his flight was ahead of me and a little bit below. And I looked down, I could see his flight by looking through my engine nacelle and my cockpit. I could see one of his pilots or one of his aircraft was really burning, had both engines burning away. And I was in a turn. I remember as I levered and put the nose down, I would lever it up and press the trigger, and I saw him fall off to the left side, and then the other one made a turn and took off to and the P-38, I never saw him again. He had both engines on fire. I don't know what happened to him. I was so busy fooling with these two 109s that I didn't keep up with him too well.
Well, did you go up into the clouds to get rid of them, or how did you do? What did you do?
No, you know what happened? Doug, it's so funny. We figured we were all going to be shot down. We were just caught in this Luftberry, and we didn't know how to get out of it or what to do. And then all of a sudden, just a few minutes after I ran out of ammunition, 2 or 3 more minutes after that, all of a sudden, the 51s, the 109s just half-rode and dove away from the fight. They just left. And we were sitting there by ourselves up over Budapest. And we formed up the best we could and headed back for Foggia. I keep forgetting that. But the only thing we could figure is they must have got an order from somebody, either on the ground or in the air, and they all just broke off their fight. They had us outnumbered. And if they kept at it, they'd probably shot us all down. I don't know. I couldn't be of any help because I was out of ammunition by this time. But somehow they had a signal. They all just rolled the 109s over and just dove away.
Wow.
And just left us up there by ourselves. So we headed back home to Foggia.
Could have then been low on fuel and stuff, and they just had to get out of there? Or?
It could have been, yeah. There must have been some order because they had us outnumbered by quite a few.
They recognized it was Jack Lenox.
Jack, what's your total kill, lifetime kill?
I'm sorry.
What's your total kill?
Total credited kills.
I had 5 kills and 1 probable kill, and later on they give me credit for that. So I had 6 total.
Okay.
So that made you an ace. When you shot down 5, that made you an ace then, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The ace thing is an old thing that happened during World War I. There was the French Airforce, I think, had it. They started it, and the British and Americans just kind of followed it. And the German, they had some great aces in Germany. You know what? The German had 300 and some aces, 300 and some bit, and quite a few. The Germans were good. The equipment was good. You've got to give them credit. We probably just outnumbered it. Finally, we just outnumbered them. But to begin with, the Germans really had they were flying good equipment, and they knew what, you know what they did? They all trained in the Spanish Civil War. They all went down to the Spanish Civil War and became experts in what kind of formation they wanted for. Yeah.
Were you always, when you guys flew, you were always with as escort, or did you ever go out hunting for trouble?
Yeah, we did. We go on. Well, that one time when I shot down
That first one? Huh?
the second one, I guess it was. We were just out looking for. We just flying up over northern Italy looking for something to shoot at. But most of the time we were escorting the B-24s and B-17s. And in fact, one fellow and I think he was a tail gun on a B-24, wrote a song about the P-38. Probably always something about.
He's trying to get your attention over here.
And we're running a little bit out of time on the room, so.
Oh, okay.
So I think Paul back there had one question he wanted to ask you.
Okay, Paul.
38 didn't have an ejection seat, did it?
No.
What was the procedure for getting up, if you had to get out?
Well, what they recommended you do is roll the aircraft over and push yourself out. Unbuckle your seatbelt, roll the aircraft over and push it, and take your canopy off. Roll the aircraft over and just push yourself out of that plane. One of the fellows, they was shot down that day, broke his back because he hit the vertical stabilizer as he departed the airplane, and he had a broken back out of that.
Let me get that one point in about the German pilots. Because they didn't have any 25 limit. When they were a pilot, they stayed in, and that was their tour of duties their entire life. So I think there was a Hauptmann who was the top. He had 350 kills, German.
Yeah.
So they didn't drive. So the Americans and I think the British got 25.
Yeah, I don't know, but I know. Oh yeah, some of them had around 300.
Yeah, Hauptmann I think was one of the top ones.
Yeah. They went to work every day of the war, yeah.
I guess so. But I appreciate you all, and I probably could talk longer than I should have, but I didn't sit down, so.
You did great. Better than I could.
Yeah.